Maurice Nicol's Psychological Commentary, Volume 5, Amwell, April 25th, 1953. The middle divisions of centers. In a previous paper, it was emphasized that a center is divided into three divisions: external, middle, and internal. I said that I would not speak about the middle division before the time being. The middle division is intermediary between the outer and inner divisions and can, so to speak, look both ways. It is the part that you reason with and where you form your conclusions about things. The outer division, as has been said, is under the sway of the senses and is the seat of the sensual mind. If the middle division inclines toward the outer division, it reinforces it, and the man reasons and thinks wholly sensually. If, however, the middle division inclines toward the inner division, the man can also think psychologically or spiritually, adopting for the moment an older formulation of these three divisions. The outer division can be called natural, the middle rational, and the inner division spiritual, corresponding to 3 degrees of man, namely natural man, rational man, and spiritual man. Now, in matters spiritual, the sensual mind is of no use, save to deny them, and there have always been various things said or commanded about the danger of mixing spiritual matters which require psychological understanding with matters of the outer senses which open only to the external world. For example, there is the third commandment: thou shalt not make unto thee a graven image, nor the likeness of any form that is in heaven above. Exodus 24. One meaning of this commandment is that the conception of God must not be sensual, based on an object. God is not to be thought of as an object apparent to the senses. We really have to understand here that God, or put in work terms, the absolute, is not a created thing. For what is created needs a creator. God, on the or the absolute, is uncreate. That is not in space and time where visible creation exists. In this connection, Christ expressly said, God is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. That's John 4:24. He is not an object of the senses living here somewhere in space, moment by moment. The soul, which is the function of relationship to your inner world and whose destination is to be turned away from the senses toward another order of truth called God, must not be turned outwards to things seen, but inwards to realities that are invisible and cannot be touched, but can be fully experienced as inflows of new meaning at intervals. That is to say, turn towards the two higher centers as the work indicates. Those higher centers open into higher cosmoses, one of which is the sun cosmos. When the work says that we have to prepare our lower centers, which open to the lower cosmoses, for the reception of higher centers, one thing necessary is the opening of the inner divisions, and this is impossible if we remain sensually minded. Now, a man who uses his middle division only for reasoning and arguing from the senses, from the evidence of things seen, that is, from percepts, and draws conclusions or concepts from the manifold illusions of the senses, the simplest of which is that the sun goes round the earth, or that man is nothing but his physical, visible body, necessarily experiences great difficulty in believing that any other realities can exist that are not apparent in his 5 external senses, aided or unaided. As often as not, indeed, he will make a joke of the whole idea or secretly ridicule it. Many do this even without realizing it. This attitude will entirely prevent the opening up of the inner divisions of sinners, which is the object of all esoteric teaching, including this work, and makes the difference between a mere two-legged animal and a man. A man is only a man through his understanding, and unless the inner divisions of his lower centers are open, he understands nothing aright. This difficulty of believing always goes with an inability to reach the level of psychological thinking, which is above logical and materialistic thinking, and is necessarily accompanied by an insistence on the material facts and literalness in dealing, for example, with the scriptures or any other esoteric writings. Therefore, the idea of hidden or esoteric meaning in Holy Writ is not given in any credence. That is why Christ said to the lawyers, "Woe unto you, lawyers, for ye have taken away the key of knowledge. Ye entered not into in yourselves, and them that were entering in ye hindered." Luke 11:52. Psychological understanding is the key taken away, leaving only the literal understanding. No one, however, can understand a parable literally. Consider the parable of the 10 virgins who had 10 lamps and only 5 had oil in them. Do you imagine Dias is to be taken literally, and that actually virgins and actual lamps and oil and sense objects are meant? No. What is meant is that a person having properly formed knowledge of this work, which is the inner meaning of Christ's teaching, and never doing it, will not be permitted to enter the conscious circle of humanity, and the door will be shut against him. The psychological meaning is totally distinct from the sensual meaning. Esoteric teaching cannot be understood with the sensual mind and can only give wrong results if the attempt is made. Spiritual or psychological understanding is quite different from sensual, literal understanding. But with the man who insists on material facts and literal meaning as being the only kind of truth, and no doubt tells his housekeeper to see that the lamps are kept filled, the result is that the inner divisions of centers are never opened up and cannot be. They remain shut. And the whole psychology of man is tilted steeply towards the world of the senses, into sensual evidence. However, if some of the ideas of the work penetrate as far as the inner divisions of centers, owing to the man not reasoning sensually and literally about them, such as man is not actually asleep, surely, the whole attitude changes and the truth of the ideas begins to be realized as a personal inner experience. This is due to the work of the inner divisions, which connect things in a new way, and is quite different from the connections made by the external divisions. Such a person is awakening. He has now granted to him some degree of inner perception of the truth, and, as I just said, this comes from working of the inner divisions of centers. He is no longer tied down by the sensual mind of literalness and to fact as being the only form of reality. He no longer argues formality as to whether things is true or not true, for he has begun to see truth for himself. He no longer looks uneasily around to ascertain if others believe in a statement made by the work, and if they appear to do so, hastens to subscribe it to himself, always anxious to follow the fashion. No, his behavior is quite different. His strength is now in himself individually and is not different. It's not dependent on audience. But such is not the case with a man who suffers from the uneasiness of never being able to see the truth for himself and watches others to see what they think. Such a person gets his truth from other people and does not seek the truth for himself, although He may profess to do so. He reads books without being able to see whether they contain truth or not. With such a person, the truth is not in kern, but a thin varnish laid on him. Now, what is not really in you is taken away at the death of the body. Only what you have seen in the truth for yourself through inner perception and have acknowledged is yours and remains with you always. This may seem harsh, but if you come to think of it, how otherwise can it be? How can you expect to live a finer state of matter where everything secret in your life is made manifest, falsely varnished? You will be laughed at. It is indeed a tragic thing to observe a man who has no inner perception of truth as yet awakened in himself, and who cannot really comprehend his sensual understanding what the work is talking about. He is perhaps nervous, or maybe sullen, or simply rigid and tight-lipped. He takes nothing far into himself, having nothing inward to take in with it, for he has never himself faced truth or really desired it, but has always followed the opinion of others in order to be, as he believes, on the safe side. Whatever the acquiescence he may seem to give, and even wishes to give, the work rests merely on the surface of a deeper denial of it. All this we have often spoken of before. You must understand that the sensual mind will always deny this work because it is a matter of psychological understanding and not a matter of sensual fact. The work which seems to open the inner or higher levels of a man's being, which are situated in the inner divisions of centers, is not allowed to often owing something akin to cowardice. In the case of women, this is not so apparent, as they are not, as a rule, mentally hidebound and therefore not cowardly thinkers. It is useless for people in the work to be afraid to think in a new way because the work cannot otherwise influence them. They are bound to remain sensually minded people for whom the life of the world is sufficient and in whom the inner divisions of sinners must always remain shut. Created self-developing beings, they live and die shut. The meaning by which they live will consist mainly of what is found in the lower compartments of the three-story house of man, namely in sex, in movement, and in comfort in eating and drinking. Gurdjieff taught that this triad of sinners, with the meaning derived from them, supplies the stimulations required to keep the major part of sleeping humanity fairly satisfied. He compared it with living in the basement. You will see from what has been said that a great deal depends, therefore, on how a man reasons. That is, on how he uses the middle or rational division of his lower centers. He can reason to the effect that everything in the universe is meaningless and happened accidentally, somehow, and that a long time ago there was nothing, and then there was something, or somehow or other, and then an atom appeared, and somehow then billions and billions of atoms appeared, and eventually worlds appeared somehow, and life appeared somehow, and finally man appeared somehow. A great many people nowadays seem to reason in this extraordinary way, and so make it impossible for the inner divisions of sinners to awaken. This must lead to a general decline in understanding, and even in the simplest forms of intelligence. So I ask you, how do you reason? What is your view of the universe? How do you think? Does the meaning that is latent in the ray of creation seem incredible to you? Do higher levels of being seem fantastic, or at least doubtful? Have you decided for yourself and from truth perceived in yourself higher degrees of being and consciousness, even divine being and consciousness? Or do you suppose that you have already reached them and that there is nothing higher than yourself? No greater mistake can be made than to think that your own individual view of the universe makes no difference to you and does not matter in the least. It matters a great deal, for what you think and how you reason about the universe and the meaning of your existence in it either shuts or opens the most important divisions of the intellectual and emotional centers. Ideas are very powerful. One idea can shut and another idea open the inner mind and heart. Certain ideas can make the difference between a natural man and a possible spiritual man. They can make the difference between a mechanical man, a man driven by external life as by a belt, like a machine, and a man capable of becoming less and less mechanical and more conscious, and eventually a real man possessing a real I and therefore unity of being.